like you said before, it's sort of axiomatic. Trump is not willing to shut them down. He's just not willing to resist them or go there. He doesn't care enough.
I thought the Epstein one was a particular, it's interesting how much that really was devastating for Donald Trump.
They're bought off. That's why nothing ever changes. He's rich. They can't buy him. That was the idea. Obviously wasn't true.
No, fuck this.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't tell me that it's like we have to just blindly support this while our country's still falling apart.
Dave Smith and Nick Fuentes just exposed the biggest betrayals of Donald Trump. And in this clip, they talk about the problems that right-wing dissidents have with the Trump administration, the dividing lines that are taking away from the coalition that ushered him into office, and presumably some of the reasons why his approval rating is tanking, especially compared to his first few weeks in office. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I think you've been very hampered about your criticism of Donald Trump. It seems to me like that's the appropriate thing to do now. I mean, I think there were like a few things where, I felt like when Donald Trump first got in, or right after the election was won, I tried to lead this like no Pompeo thing of like being like no Pompeo, because that was like he had spoken at the last Trump rally, and so I was talking to like Tucker and like all these other guys. I was like, dude, we should all go all in on this. Like Pompeo and Haley and all these awful people came out, and then he signed that letter saying Pompeo and Haley won't be in it, and then I was like, okay, not enough. All the neocons got to be kept out now, And then Donald Trump Jr. like quote tweeted me and was like 100%, I'm on it, blah, blah, blah. And there was a moment there where I was like, fucking maybe, like I actually maybe want to believe. I mean, and part of it, and I know, I mean, I'm a libertarian. So like, I know that I've been through this, but I know all the talking points and how nothing ever changes. There's no government solutions and blah, blah, all this. But I was like, you know what? They did try to arrest this guy. They did try to do more than arrest this guy. Maybe, again, I'm not trying to jump to a web, but there were some things about that really just don't add up. I'm still very, skeptical of the official story on that. But it's like, maybe there's actually something. But, after continuing to bag Israel, the Epstein thing was a big one. The Iran thing was like a death blow. It was like, and at this point, it's not like there's another election coming up. We already kind of know what the Trump thing is. We've gotten some small wins. The border control is a big win. I shouldn't say that. That's not a small thing. He really did turn that around. He deserves credit for that. But everything else, Nick, everything else has just been a disaster.
Yeah, I'm on board with this too, and I'm a libertarian that didn't support Trump, though I understood the libertarian case for favoring him over Harris. I wouldn't have understood the case for endorsing Trump and saying he's amazing. But as an alternative to Harris, I could buy into some of the mentality about that. He did get the U.S. out of the World Health Organization, basically dismantled U.S. aid and freed Ross Ulbricht, all of which are good things I've complimented him on. But yeah, it has been disaster after disaster after disaster when it comes to spending and debt, being dragged into all this Israel first nonsense, which doesn't seem like he ever kind of went against on the campaign trail, and you couldn't have expected him to, with Miriam Adelson's $100 million stuffed into his pockets. But it's that and, abandoning Doge, this Epstein cover-up showing the duplicity of this administration covering up a sex trafficking ring that was likely part of a foreign blackmail operation. Probably Mossad, by the way. So yeah, I'm with Dave on this. There doesn't seem to be many silver linings anymore. And I think many of us appropriately called that out. I don't think the good thing is to just gloat about that, but it's to reveal that this always happens where, some good things are said on the campaign trail that are often discarded when, your chosen candidate fades into the nebula that is the uniparty, that is the ruling establishment, where Lockheed Martin and AIPAC control things more than the American electorate.
And so, I don't know, I think we're in a similar place where it's like, no, fuck this.
Yeah.
I mean, you just can't tell me that it's like we have to just blindly support this while our country's still falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, there's just no argument anymore. In 2024...
I'm sorry, one of you guys just grab me a water? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, in 2024, there was at least this argument to be made that maybe it would be different this time. And like you said, you articulated the reasons why. They tried to kill him, they impeached him, they charged him. So the question was, is it going to be different this time? Did he learn? Is there going to be better people? And And I get that. So I didn't like begrudge people that did vote for him, but there were signs. You know, Nikki
Yes,
Haley
there were.
endorsed him, and he
signs.
said we were going to go to war with Iran, basically. He said they were going to bring in the H-1Bs and all this stuff. And, you know, and then they appointed the cabinet within like 3 weeks. Rubio for Secretary of State. And I guess the interesting thing I have to say beyond what is obvious, you know, which is that it's kind of crashing and burning, is I look at a guy like Kurt Mills, you know, Kurt Mills at AmCon, and, you know, he seems like he's a good guy. Like, he's 100% on board, maybe more with you than me, but, like, he knows relevant facts. And I remember watching him during the negotiation between Trump and, or I should say, Witkoff and Araghchi or whoever it was on the Iranian side. And he would go on Steve Bannon every week and say, any day now, like, they're going to make a deal, and, you know, Netanyahu's going to be put in his place. And I'm thinking, have you ever seen anything in history? It never goes that way. Like, and it never goes that way because, like you said before, it's sort of axiomatic. Trump is not willing to shut them down. He's just not willing to resist them or go there. He doesn't care enough, or whatever the reason is. It's hard to know what's in his heart or in his mind.
Yeah, this is exactly right. There are warning signs in the first administration for this, by the way, the Israel first mentality that he puts forward in the Oval Office. His administration exudes this. It was moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. That's a step that kind of precludes a Palestinian state. He shredded the U.S. relationship with the JCPOA, the agreement with Iran that curtailed their nuclear enrichment process and normalized relations. That's something Netanyahu didn't want. So Trump shredded it. He pardoned the handler of Jonathan Pollard. There were lots of other things that gave you that clue. And when it comes to the neocons, it just reminds me of a football team that has, you know, next man up. There's like 3 men in each position. When the guard goes down with an injury, ACL tear, you have another neocon to fill his place. So yeah, I was on that bandwagon too. Stop Pompeo at all costs, because he was one of the most vile swamp creatures in my entire lifetime, trying to plan the assassination of Julian Assange and lying to the president about troop levels such that he could exacerbate and expand the wars in Syria and Yemen. And don't get me wrong, Trump deserves culpability, especially for using one of his only vetoes to extend the blockade in Yemen. But this is exactly right. Nick is right. Trump has never really done anything policy-wise. There have been some like rhetorical tricks. Oh, I'm so mad that I'm so mad, says Trump, that Netanyahu violated the ceasefire I arranged with Iran, but it never manifests into actual leverage against Israel, which is never utilized. It's never done. There's no resistance against Israel from this administration.
He won't do it. And then, you know, I think it was like 3 days before we went to war, he goes, you know, it's not on radar that Trump is going to attack Iran. That's not on radar. It's like, buddy, read the tea leaves. Like, of course he's going to go and bomb Iran. So, and I kind of get where you're coming from about the Pompeo. I was even skeptical about the Pompeo thing, because I said they got a list of these people they're going to put in. And,
yeah, remember they got Huckabee and Waltz, and they got Marco Rubio as the most powerful position in government other than the president, probably the Secretary of State. They got John Ratcliffe. Even Tulsi Gabbard and RFK are very pro-Israel, very pro-Israel. That was the clear litmus test to even get into this administration. Kash Patel, too. Kash Patel said stuff like, we need to prioritize our relationship with Israel more. It's like, give me what kind of world are you from where you don't think it's appropriately prioritized? That's insane.
And that's why I'm a big believer in like this. It's not even, people say, are you going to vote for a Democrat? We got to think beyond that. To me, it's just about rejection. They set the table, and you can't really choose what's on the table, but you could choose whether to eat or not, whether you're going to play the game. And so my bigger idea is just reject. Like, and I like what you said. It encapsulates it. It's bullshit. No, thank you. You know, you're promising stuff you know you're not going to deliver. When you put this stuff out there, the big, beautiful bill, $150 billion for border enforcement, they're not deporting even 1,000 people a day. Like, it's nothing. And so I just look at these guys like Dan Caldwell crying on Tucker, at Kurt Mills, all that kind of stuff. People saying, we're going to hold their feet to the fire. We're going to pressure them. And I'm like, aren't you tired? We did that already. We did that in the first term, because I was kind of in that place in the first term where it's like, we're going to control the personnel. We're going to do this. And I knew people in the admin. I knew people on the campaign that didn't get hired because they were on the campaign, because the people in the admin were from the Rubio campaign or the Bush campaign. And it's like, we just need something that at the end of the day is what we want, not a compromise. I know it's not how politics works, but we just need something that is promising and intends on delivering what we really care about. And Trump was never that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with this. I don't think the appropriate focus is on federal elections, frankly, actually. You guys know me. I focus on federal and national politics, foreign policy, etc. But what makes anyone think at this point that the solution to society's woes is to insert their favorite of two hand-picked presidential nominees picked by their respective parties because of their adherence to the lobbies, to Israel, to the military-industrial complex, to the banks, that they've gotten through the filtration process, that they were acceptable to the establishment enough just to be nominated? I don't know what could make you think that. That's why I do believe in focusing not only on things that aren't political, but still move the needle culturally. Independent media shows that actually are groundbreaking, talk about the truth, call balls and strikes against the ruling class, embrace populism of all flavors against those that want us dead, that despise regular Americans and want to instead, pursue the empire building projects of the overseers and ruling class. That's what I want. I also want people engaging in nullification, using local political power to push back against the egregious, immoral, or unconstitutional mandates or laws from the feds. If you had people with big cojones, and guess what? You have a lot more influence over your state representatives and local officials than you do the federal government. If they had cojones to do that, we'd be living in a much different world.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's, it's a shame in a way. A friend of mine, Scott Horton, always says the country needed Ron Paul and we got Donald Trump, which is, kind of how I see it. Maybe you would say more like Pat Buchanan or someone like that. But, I think both of us would take either of those options if they were on the table. But it is, and I do think, I thought the Epstein one was a particular, it's interesting how much that really was devastating for Donald Trump. And it was more than just the Epstein story. I think it was like what that symbolized, that it was like right at the heart of his political raison d'etre, which was draining the swamp.
Right.
And it was like, come on, man, what's a better example of the swamp than this? Oh, we won't touch that? Okay. All right, then. So I guess we know how serious we are about this.
Totally agree. Then that's eaten away at his support internally within his coalition more than any other issue. Various polls show that. We've talked about that on the show various times, that a lot of his approval tanked in handling that, I think throughout August or July, one of the two. That really hurt him in so many ways with his base that really bought into, the drain the swamp, America first mentality, where you're calling out the corruption in Washington. But instead of bringing transparency on this, when your campaign talked about it a lot, you're going to cover up a child sex trafficking operation on behalf of probably a foreign government. And just, grant leniency toward anyone involved, which did include some of the most powerful people in the world.
And I got to say, I see nothing promising about JD Vance. I think my view of it seems to be that I do think that he's like, maybe kind of sympathetic to my foreign policy views. And I think that he does seem to err more on that side, but I just don't think he has anywhere near the stones to stand up to anyone. I think he wants to be president more than he wants to care about that. And that right there that's the deal breaker then. Okay, then. So you're not, and again, to your point,
he's also so astroturfed. He was kind of built in a lab by Peter Thiel as this kind of Manchurian candidate that, defers to Peter Thiel and his association with the CIA, with Palantir receiving its initial seed money, $2 million from In-Q-Tel. That was the financial wing of the CIA. It still exists, by the way, and wants to aggregate our data into a centralized database far beyond what the NSA does today, to link it with IRS data and data from other agencies and engage in pre-crime scams that make Minority Report look non-fictional. This is pre-crime literally happening with a program that that Palantir is working on.
I think, which I would just maybe modify, and I think you probably agree with this too. It's like, I'm not even against compromise, but there's got to be a compromise.
Yes,
there's got to be like a
yes.
reasonable compromise. Like
Yes.
I am willing to compromise on a few things, but the compromise can't be I have to bend over and grab my ankles. Like that's not not a reasonable compromise that I'm trying to sign up to. So it's like I just don't, and I wonder. Because, you know, like there's always two ways to look at this. And like the conventional political thinking, the Charlie Kirk thinking would be like, well, any dissension here only helps the Democrats, right? So if we're not all rallying around them, then we get the Democrats who are the worst, you know, biggest threat. But of course, I think our rejoinder to that would be that like, well, no, not releasing the Epstein files is what gives and when I say file, you know, just not getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah, they're handing nukes to the Democrats by covering up the Epstein scandal, engaging in debt spending far beyond the Democrats, whipping for more spending than Biden, the big abominable bill, and expanding and extending the Biden CR. You're going to get into a new war with Iran, talk about winning back new territory that Ukraine has lost in Ukraine. All these things completely went against Trump's platform and agenda and campaign, and that's what gives the Democrats ammo. It's not you holding out because the Republicans are so duplicitous, and like Michael Malice says, progressives driving the speed limit. That's how I view them too.
That's what gives them that. And what is JD Vance going to run on? I mean, how is he going to capture that energy that Donald Trump had? We're furious with this system. The system is so corrupt and so dishonest and so such a betrayal to every American that we want someone to go in there and be a wrecking ball against them. How is JD Vance possibly going to capture that energy?
Right.
When there's nobody's believing it anymore.
Well, and with Trump, I feel like a lot of people just forgot really what he was. There were a lot, because I feel like not a lot of people actually voted for him in 2016 that are around now. Yeah. And you and I know, because we both, I mean, you're around longer than me, but we were both around then. And I feel like there's a lot of young people and maybe even like big supporters of Trump now that weren't really with him in 16. And so what I'm trying to say is for a lot of people, they have amnesia. They think that he's a Republican. He's a conservative, like, because that's really what he's become. That is what he was in 20. That's what he was in 24. He's against the radical left. He's against the Democrats. But in 16, he started out fighting the Republican establishment. And he really ran as like an independent. Yeah. And I always go back to the proposition of Trump. This is my basis for not voting for him last year, which is not, I'm better than the Democrats, which is the minimum. Yeah. You're a Republican. Oh, he's better than Kamala. Okay, isn't that a given? Like, shouldn't you be? It's not that he's a conservative or anything like that. He said, the system is rigged and it's broken. I will break it because I'm rich. I'm so rich, I don't need to take their money. And if I don't have to take their money, I can actually deliver real change because I don't have to worry about upsetting them. That, in a nutshell, was the premise. And that was his appeal. He would go up on the stage and, like, you watch this now and you're like, where's this guy? That famous clip where he goes, they're booing him, and he goes, that's all donors in the audience. So I don't want their money. I don't need their money. And everyone resonated right, left, and center, said, yeah, fuck the system. That's true.
Yeah, this is so true. Back from 2016, and you saw him wreck two major political dynasties, multi-generational ones, the Clintons and the Bushes, essentially telling Jeb Bush on stage that Iraq was a disaster and what his brother did was immoral and one of the worst things that U.S. president had ever done. And that was so true, right? That's what won people so much favor with Trump. And Nick's right. He did run something of kind of an independent candidacy. He was something out of, some foreign universe when it came to the Republican establishment. Even Rand Paul running at that time couldn't seem to outflank him on being more anti-war. And that was telling. I like Rand Paul, but his campaign, I think, was diseased in 2016. So I do agree with that. What I will disagree with is Trump hasn't really differentiated himself as a conservative. If we're talking about, things that are different than the norms that happen in Washington, he's as big of a spender of the Democrats, if not more. He was more than his predecessor in his first term, and he's on track to be more of a spender now. He, after talking about settling the war in Ukraine, saying famously, I'll do that in 24 hours, seems to only want to continue it going with, various ebbs and flows and different kind of rhetoric, but, providing Ukraine with more intelligence, more weaponry, etc. 9 months in at this point, the ruse is up. He didn't really want to solve that. Seems like he wants to line the pockets of Lockheed Martin more than he wants to solve that. Deferring to Israel first. All these things put him well within the ruling class that exists both in the liberal establishment and in the conservative establishment. So that part I'll push back on.
They're bought off. That's why nothing ever changes. He's rich. They can't buy him. That was the idea. Obviously wasn't true. Then now in 24, when he got 200 million from Tim Mellon and from Elon Musk and Ken Griffin and Mark Andreessen, the usual suspects. And with JD Vance, like you said, it's just even worse. It's disgusting that anyone's even considering voting for him, to me, because it's like, at least Trump had kind of a claim to be that guy because he was this like bombastic billionaire from the private sector. Vance is like your prototypical political artifact, like a creation in a lab, like fake career, fake name, fake book, patrons in the CIA, like he's a nerd. He's not even really that conservative, the fake conversion. Maybe he's a real convert, but it seems too convenient. Like he's everything that Trump ran against. He's like Jeb Bush. He was calling Trump a Nazi and voted for McMullen.
Yeah, he did say that Trump is America's Hitler, and I agree with this for the most part, too. It's impossible to replicate the charisma and cult of personality around Trump. I think he's an aberration. He really sticks out in so many ways in that regard. But I will say JD Vance seems to be very popular on the right, generally so. I think he will be tarnished by this Epstein scandal. He didn't say that much about it, but he's part of this administration. And, he's on the record talking about how, he wants to, exacerbate tensions with China. Before he got into office, when he became the nominee the first night of the Republican convention, he talked about how much he wanted to bomb Iran, too, something that might hurt him. Now, he has been more non-interventionist, but only in comparison to like Marco Rubio, if that's any consolation. But again, I agree with Nick here. Palantir is really going to hurt him. And as Tim Dillon said it comically, he might have to address this on the campaign trail and say something like, yes, Peter Thiel and Palantir are Satan, and here's why that's a good thing. Try to spin it that direction. We'll see.
And it was a never Trumper. So... and I'm just unloading my case against him, but it's like they could not be more different. So to your point, how are you going to sell that? I don't know how any MAGA person is buying it, but I think they will.
And there's another thing where the vice presidency, the role, it's an interesting job because there's really not a job. Exactly. Mm-hmm. But it makes you kind of like, oh, you're the next in line. But if you just remove that for a second, who would have ever thought JD Vance could carry a national election? JD Vance is not Donald Trump. Donald Trump is the most famous human being who's ever lived, who's bombastic and charismatic and just like owns a room like no other. Like really is like as a unique gift in this way. Unfortunately, all of these gifts are only for like marketing and promotion and running for that. It's not like he has no governing, ability at all. But like JD Vance doesn't have that. He doesn't have that factor, the Hitler aura, as you would describe it. You know what I mean? But like and so it's you're just looking at this and you go, so look, if you're telling me that like the radical left Democrats are the real threat, which granted they are, it's like it seems like we're staring at them having a chance.
Yeah, they could have a chance in this next election. Trump's approval has been hurting. There's a lot of time between now and then, even some time before the midterms. There's a full year before the midterms. We'll get a lot of data from that to see, what kind of Democratic candidates win those elections, which will be telling too. Will it be more of the anti-Israel populists, or will it be more of the liberal establishment types, like, the Whitmer and Gavin Newsom types, right? That's going to be interesting to see. I have yet to be sold that the Democrats can field anyone that can really go against Vance at this point, but a lot can change in 3 years, certainly so. We've seen that many times over. In fact, Donald Trump himself was considered a joke candidate. Remember, Jeb Bush was the front runner, and Trump was just this clown dope that was, popular for having reality shows and being a real estate mogul, but he had no shot at the presidency, right? So that tells you a lot can change. We'll see. I'm basically entirely on board with what I'm hearing here. I don't think Trump's really become a conservative. I guess he kind of has when it comes to conservative ink, but he doesn't represent the populist views, at least the best of them, that he put forward on the campaign trail, in either campaign. I mean, to say drain the swamp now is just a meme, right? What element of the swamp has been drained? No, it hasn't. Instead of the swamp being drained, it's been filled with the most vile swamp creatures imaginable that are in many cases indistinguishable from the Democrats. Same with this idea of free speech, and I can't blame Republicans for taking advantage of that talking point on the campaign trail when you had people like AOC and Hillary Clinton and Walls talking about, and Harris herself talking about how, hey, we needed to create, these institutions to police disinformation on the internet. That was the Ministry of Truth idea they were trying to resurrect there in the last weeks of the campaign. And Republicans rightly fought back against that. No, hate speech is free speech, no matter what they say. Disinformation is free speech. And now they're going with, hey, you can withhold disaster relief for people that are critics of Israel. And let's rewrite codes to make anti-Semitism be conflated with anti-Zionism and make it seem like you're an anti-Semite if you happen to criticize Israel. That's what we're seeing in several U.S. states. Nick's right. No major mass deportations, despite all the flirting with that idea. Although you can say, yeah, he's stopped a lot of the illegal immigration, not necessarily through policy, but probably through kind of just the intuition that people have that, hey, he does mean business on that, so I'm not going to risk my life and my family's life to try to cross right now. I think there's a lot of that. But I mostly agree with these critiques. For me, it's Ukraine, Iran, the debt, the inflation going on, the serious hypocrisy and the glaring hypocrisy that is the Israel first mentality when, your credo is supposed to be America first. That's what's really hitting people over the head right now, especially as we see, the genocide in Gaza unfold, the drums beat for a renewed military operation in Iran, etc. That's what we're seeing. But I do want to hear from you. Let me know down below. Was this a productive discussion? Do you agree with the critiques that Dave and Nick bring up? Do you disagree with them on anything? Let me know in the comments down below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, also subscribe to Dave. Great interview. This is one of the best segments, I thought. And please consider becoming a YouTube member. If you like this video, you like my commentary, click the join button below. Consider becoming a member. If you do that, I'll give you access to all my videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to see them before anyone else. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.